Hey everyone, I'm Jennifer Markwood. I'm the NUFA Liaison for the SAAO Executive Council. I am a third-year student up at KYCOM in Kentucky. With me today is Dr. Stiles, who is one of my favorite teachers here at school and has given me the privilege of being in this interview today. So Dr. Stiles, if you could please introduce yourself.
I'm Ed Stiles, and I'm professor of osteopathic medicine at the University of Pikeville College of Osteopathic Medicine and director of neuromusculoskeletal medicine at Pikeville Medical Center.
Perfect. And just a little bit on your background of education.
I went to Kirksville, then did an internship. In those days, you did an internship and then went right into practice. And I interned at Waterville, Maine, and then went into practice. And then after 3 years, took over Perrin Wilson's practice in Boston, which was kind of like a built-in residency.
So our first question for you would be, what was your first experience with OMM? How did you get introduced to it?
Yeah, I was a varsity swimmer for 4 years in high school and was a backstroker. And during my senior year, I hurt my back doing flip turns, because with a backstroker, you have to, when your hand hits the wall, you got to flip your hips up and twist around and then rapidly put them on the wall of the pool and shove off. And I hurt my back. And I was getting nowhere. Those days, the only non-steroidal was aspirin. There were no muscle relaxants. So they gave you phenobarbital, put you in bed, and I wasn't getting any better. And my parents took me to a DO in Connecticut, but in Connecticut in those days, DOs had a limited license and could only do manipulation. But he treated me 2 or 3 times, and I was back swimming again. So I found that pretty amazing. And so I just thought he was a chiropractor. And then the next thing that happened was I had a degree in organic chemistry from Bates College in Maine. And I took a job with Pfizer selling pharmaceutical supplies. And so I was in doctors' offices, hospitals, and pharmacies and things. And I spent a lot of time in MD's offices hearing the patients in their waiting rooms complain about musculoskeletal complaints and not getting any better. Then spent time in DO's offices and heard the patients rave about OMT. So after a year, I thought you had to be smart to be a doctor. And after calling on doctors for a year, I decided I'm going back and do it. And so I decided if I'm going back, I want to be a GP, and I know that I'd see a lot of musculoskeletal stuff. So I want to become a DO. So applied to Kirksville, went to Kirksville.
Awesome. So kind of very interesting introductory experience there. And I guess in the field of your practice, I know you've had a lot of experience and worked with some amazing people. This particular question is a little more geared towards you. What would you say is your most unique or bizarre treatment that you had to develop for a challenging case?
Okay, that was interesting because there's what happened was I moved to Oklahoma, and I was director of osteopathic medicine at Hillcrest Osteopathic Hospital in Oklahoma City. And one of the surgeons was a fellow named Paul Benin. And Paul had been an All-American lineman at the University of Oklahoma and was a general surgeon. And he called me one Monday night and said, I need to have you come up and do a consult for me. So I went up to the unit, and he said, I got a real problem. I said, what's your problem? He said, got a 53-year-old woman who's an alcoholic, a smoker. She's had a bleeding ulcer. We tried to control her conservatively for 3 or 4 days. Couldn't do it. So we went in, did a partial gastrectomy. She did beautifully for 3 days. 3 days later, she started bleeding again. We tried to regulate her conservatively. We couldn't. So we went back in and had to remove more of the stomach. And she's done beautifully for 3 days. An hour ago, she started bleeding again. And I said to him, Paul, are you just trying to get a bunch of people on the list for the malpractice suit to get the coverage? And he said, no, my father was a DO, and I've seen osteopathy do some amazing things. You treat her. And he was about twice my size. I wasn't going to argue with him. And so I went over to the bed, and the woman was semi-comatose. And when I put my hands underneath her back when she was supine and did like a modified rib raising just to screen her thoracic area, it felt as rigid as a board, and on both sides. And I thought, oh, wow. And then I thought, well, it looks like these lower ribs on the left here are restricted. I think I'll try. So I got on the front of one rib, the 10th rib, front and back, and balanced the two ends up, put a little compression in. It started to unwind and release, and she started to move on that side a little bit. So then went around and checked, and now she had a first rib on the right side that was caught in exhalation. So I took that, the same thing, did it functionally. Then I rescreened and found she had a dysfunction about T5, and thought, that's GI innervation. So I just palpated it and used her head to see would it flex or didn't want to flex or extend, side bend or rotate right or whatever. Got it in that position, put a little compression in it, released. And then I checked the cervical area, and she had an upper cervical thing, so dysfunction. So I treated that functionally. Did 4 things, dictated a consult, and I thought, that's probably the biggest waste of time I've ever spent. And I think I just signed on to one heck of a lawsuit. And in those days, I got up early Tuesday mornings to drive to Tulsa because I was chairman of the OPP department at Oklahoma State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. And I'd drive over there, teach all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday. And Wednesday night coming back home, I thought, it's not that far out of my way. I'm going to go by the hospital and see if I'm involved in a lawsuit. And I walked in, and one of the same nurses was on duty. And she when I walked in, she said, "Come here. What did you do the other night to that patient?" And I explained to her, and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Within 15 minutes, she quit bleeding, and she is not going back to surgery."
Wow. And
I thought, wow. And so I went over to the woman, and like I said, she was so semi-comatose when I treated her. And I walked over and I said, "Miss So-and-so, I'm Dr. Stiles." And she said, "Oh, we've met." And I said, "We have? I don't remember meeting you." She said, 2 nights ago. And I said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "I was aware of my environment, but I was aware of what was going on." And she said, "You have no idea of how powerful what you do is," because she said, then I found out she was an RN. She said, "Because as soon as you started working on me, I could feel my physiology change."
wow.
And she came out of it. She changed her lifestyle. She applied for a job at the hospital. And I am so glad that I didn't miss that opportunity, because a lot of people would have said that was contraindication for OMT.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't do that now in Pikeville with MD surgeons, because they wouldn't know how to back you. But where I had a DO surgeon that could say, "No, I thought this was indicated," and I knew he would back me, I thought, well, it was worth it. But we learned an amazing lesson out of that patient. And see, and I think what happened is, remember I said that whole thoracic area was just rigid,
Mm-hmm.
and I think she lost all vasomotor tone. And I think as soon as I got some movement in the rib cage and in the mid thoracic area, I think she regained her vasomotor tone, and that's when the bleeding stopped.
Wow.
So for multiple Christmases when I was in Oklahoma, every year I got a big box of steaks from Paul Bleed.
Awesome. Well, that is very interesting, and how effective we can be in situations, especially we wouldn't normally think to be brought in, or when there's just, it seems like it's left field. And it's one of the things that I enjoy most.
Saved that woman's life.
Yes. Well, so I know you're definitely her osteopathic hero, but I'm kind of curious to hear who you consider your osteopathic hero.
I don't have a hero. I can't say that because I got too many. The first one would be George Andrew Laughlin, who was one of Stiles' grandsons. And he really impacted on me on my first year at Kirksville, because I had a lot of professors that were good talkers about OMT, but I didn't see the results. Laughlin got unbelievable results consistently. And so that really made me decide that that was the route I wanted to go. I wanted to really learn the OMT stuff. Then the second hero would be Fred Mitchell Sr., and he invited me to be in the first muscle energy tutorial he taught. And he changed my whole clinical paradigm and came up with a whole new way of diagnostic way of diagnosing somatic dysfunction and things that now you take for granted, but was all totally new then. And then to realize you could use muscles to introduce the corrective force for a patient treatment was just mind-boggling to me. Then the third one would be Perrin Wilson, and I took over his practice, and I had access to him anytime I wanted. So I ran that practice for 5 years. So it was like a 5-year tutorial. And he was internationally known, was a big player in the profession, was an expert in high velocity. and taught me what he did, but he had a whole different way of doing high velocity that nobody does anymore. That was fabulous. But he was the one that really encouraged me to spend time with Mitchell. And then another one would be Phil Greenman. And during that first tutorial, he was my roommate. And we watched Mitchell all day long and watched him treat and teach. Then we'd sit up most of the night talking about, have you ever seen anything like this? This is amazing. And we became good friends and for 45 years. And for the next 45 years, we did a lot of both national and international teaching, spreading muscle energy. But Phil had a profound effect on me and dragged me into teaching. And two of the concepts he had that I think are profound was one, he was saying, what makes a DO different is not OMT, but how they think and how they problem solve. And see, and a good example would be that example I gave in Oklahoma City of that bleeding GI patient, you know, because I thought it through differently. And it wasn't the OMT, just was the approach that we used, but thinking it through different, he gave a different approach. And the other thing he always said was experts do the basics the best. And so Mitchell, when he was teaching in his tutorials, stressed principles, and then how to apply them, those principles in multiple ways, and didn't teach as much specific technique, but made us think through how you would approach osteopathy. And then the last one was Paul Kimberly, and Paul was a giant in the profession, and he was involved in more pivotal events in the early days of osteopathy in the early 1900s, from say 1920 all the way up to 1995. And we did a lot of teaching together in the postgraduate courses at Michigan State. And I learned an awful lot about Paul, about principles and how to apply principles. And he used to say to me, if you learn the principles well, then you can get them to work for you. Then you can work smart and you don't have to work hard. And then he gave me a lot of historical background of the profession because he had lived it. And he and Greenman were the ones that really put osteopathy on the map internationally. So I think those would be the people that had a profound, and Greenman, and last time we talked before he died, he said to me, Stiles, you have to remember, you were the only one in the history of the profession that was ever mentored for a number of years by Mitchell, Laughlin, and Laughlin. So Laughlin, Mitchell, and Wilson, he said, nobody else in the profession ever had long periods of time with them. And so you've got a unique perspective. And it's true. It's because what I do is kind of a composite of what they all did. And that's why I can't say I just got one hero.
Well, definitely, you've been very influential for us students here, and we definitely appreciate you. And thank you today for your interview. And it was wonderful speaking with you.
All righty. Have a good day.